Good evening and welcome to live stream at the Upper Room. We're glad you're joining us tonight. Boy, I'll tell you, if the last few weeks haven't been strange from a presidential election standpoint, it makes the election and the election of 2000 with Al Gore and George Bush look like elementary play. There's a lot of news breaking this week, and it's coming to the surface almost by the minute. And if it's legitimate, it's going to be widespread corruption, and it's going to be the biggest news in presidential election history. I'm getting from a lot of different sources, reliable sources, that what's being revealed is corruption on a scale we've never seen before. And there's as I understand, and we'll talk about tonight, a sting operation that involved operatives even in the CIA, some major political figures, the mainstream media, big tech. If they're all complicit and things come down the way that are being reported, it's going to be major. But it doesn't stop there. The media continues to black this out, and they're not talking about it. They continue to want to just crown Joe Biden and Kamala Harris as president-elect and vice president-elect. They're virtually ignoring this story. But what's obvious is the talking points that the mainstream media is using right now. They're almost verbatim what's coming from the Democratic Party as well as the Biden camp. And we didn't put this together, but we got a little video that we're going to show you tonight that talks about what I mean about how the media is all just falling into place behind the talking points. So, Marisa, let's go ahead and play that video.
Hi, I'm Fox San Antonio's Jessica Headley.
And I'm Ryan Wolf.
Our greatest responsibility is to serve our Treasure Valley communities, the El Paso, Las Cruces communities, Eastern Iowa communities,
Mid-Michigan communities.
We are extremely proud of the quality, balanced journalism that CBS 4 News produces.
But
we are concerned about troubling and irresponsible, one-sided news stories plaguing our country.
The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
The sharing of biased and
false news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish these stories simply aren't true without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think. And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
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 Unbelievable. And they're calling us on the right and Trump supporters the kooks. They're all reading from the same script that's coming out of the Biden camp, out of the Democratic Party, and it's all complicit. We're going to take a look at that tonight. And joining us again for the second week in a row to sort all this out and to talk about all the details and what's coming down and what to expect is once again New York Times best-selling author and political commentator, James Hirsen. James, welcome to the live stream again at the Upper Room.
Thanks for having me, Ron. It's great to be with you.
I'm glad that you were available again tonight, and we appreciate it. You know, when I talked to you today, and you said, yeah, I'll do it, and then you said, we've got a country to save. And
well,
that indeed,
right.
We do, don't we?
Because we know what's really dangerous to our democracy.
We know what's really dangerous.
Just want to start off. I hear the words "our democracy," And we've heard that tossed around,
Yeah.
And the fact is, we don't have a democracy, not a pure democracy. A democracy leads to tyranny. Democracy is a mobocracy. That's why our founding fathers gave us a representative democracy in the form of a republic. That's what makes our country work.
Right.
Pure democracies, by the way, are always the way tyrannies begin. Hitler began with a plebiscite. Socialist tyrannies always begin with a democracy. So this talk about our democracy is ignorant. And the other thing, of course, we've learned, the Russians were destroying our democracy. The Ukrainian conversation that took place was destroying our democracy. Stormy Daniels was destroying our democracy. Omarosa was destroying our democracy. And nothing comes close to what is happening since, the lead up to election day itself, so many things trying to destroy the founding principles of our republic. And that's what we want to keep.
Yeah, that's so true. And let me just get a little housekeeping out of the way. Folks that are watching, we didn't get to audience questions last week, but with just James on this week and a little less of a cluttered schedule, I would like to get to some questions. So be typing in your questions. Some of them might get answered as we go on, but we would love to get to some of your questions and have James answer some of those. James, I do a lot of posting on Facebook, and I've gotten very political in the last few months because I just feel that I need to. And I've been criticized by a lot of people for doing that, and particularly people on the left who, when I've started talking about what's coming down right now and what's beginning to come out with the news, and we're going to talk about that, we're considered just kooks, and give it up. We need a fair and peaceful transition of power, and this is coming from people who never once conceded for the last 4 years of a Donald Trump presidency. And one of the things I tell everybody is this is bigger than Donald Trump. This is about our republic. This is about the country, and this is about the integrity of our elections and the credible news that's coming out. And I've been very, very careful to not want to push into this if it's not credible. But when credible sources start coming out, such as Sidney Powell, Rudy Giuliani, and others with information that's beginning to develop, and the sting operation that has discovered all of this, you have to take pause. And what's interesting to me is those on the left who refuse to even look at the irregularities and the anomalies in this election. And yet they still say, oh, no, Biden won. And but the anomalies are just too glaring to ignore. So what I wanted to do, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say they are too glaring. The media is blatantly lying. They're suppressing. Anytime they use the words evidence of fraud, of voter fraud, they put in front of it unsubstantiated.
Yes.
Or they put in front of it non-existent, or some other qualifier. And it's very biblical. The prophet Isaiah in the Bible wrote about a time where good would be called evil and evil would be called good. We can extrapolate and say we live in a time where lies are called truth and truth are called lies, or truth is ignored completely.
Yeah.
But the problem is that in the lead up to this election, we had what the president calls fake news. We had a fake impeachment, a fake investigation, and we had fake polls, obviously, because the polling was so far off again. And the polling industry, as Frank Luntz said before the election, if they were wrong, they should give it up. They should quit.
Yeah.
But we have the combination of big tech and establishment corporate media forming a monolith like the video that we saw, where they read from the same page and they refuse to put people on, and there's rare exceptions. So it's so much of a challenge now, finding where the truth is, discerning where the truth is. And thankfully, we have these independent networks like the one that I write for. Newsmax.com has a TV streamer. One American News. There are others out there. First TV. There's The Blaze, and there's places that you can catch up. And then there's certain corners of the now disgraced Fox News that we'll talk about, such as Maria Bartiromo's show. Maria is a champ.
Yeah.
And so, you talk about the anomalies. One of the biggest anomalies, there's so many, but looking at the election from a big picture and remembering the saga of that night, it's something that never happened in America ever before, is that swing states where Donald Trump was leading, that are run by Democrats, that have these machine cities in them, stopped. All of a sudden, in the evening, they stopped. And people said, and there was no explanation as to why they stopped counting. And it was after they stopped for a while, the spikes for Joe Biden appeared.
Yeah.
Those spikes on a graph over time, we have a line that looks kind of like a gentle slope. And then all of a sudden, after they stop, it's straight up for Joe Biden. That's not only is that a statistical anomaly, it's a mathematical impossibility in the absence of something, irregularity, fraud. And so there are people crunching numbers that are using the data, and they're crunching it on a national level, they're crunching it on a local level, and they're using forensic techniques that are used to detect fraud in accounting and banking. And they're coming up with amazing things. And, amateurs are doing it all over the internet, but the professionals are working for the legal team and developing evidence. And that's, the important thing. One of the anomalies is this. We look across the entire nation and we look at the Joe Biden vote count, and it is historically lower than Hillary Clinton's vote count in 2016, and historically low across the whole nation, except for 4 places, 4 cities that happen to be known for having machines, for happen to be known for corruption in voting, and happen to be in swing states that swung rapidly during that period in the middle of the night. And those cities are Atlanta in Georgia, Philadelphia in Pennsylvania, Detroit in Michigan, and Milwaukee in Wisconsin. In those cities, the vote tally's strangely higher. It's a statistical anomaly. And in the case of Wisconsin, there's some data that shows a very large amount of votes where it appears that the person only voted for president, didn't vote for any of what they call down ballot, which is Congress, senator, as if, I guess, Biden voters were in such a hurry that they just voted for Biden. And so those are the kinds of things. And we have, now affidavits from eyewitnesses. And I say we, I mean the Trump legal team, particularly Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell, have talked about this.
Yeah.
Kelly McEnany said there were 240 of these affidavits. The affidavits show various forms of voter malfeasance. They also have evidence of a very large amount of people who were so committed to their civil duty that they voted after they died. I believe we may be hitting the thousands of those. Yeah. And the press says about the dead vote, they say, well, there's always dead people that vote. That goes back to JFK. And so they say, there's a certain amount of tolerance that we ought to have for fraud, for blatant fraud, disenfranchising the voters and undermining the greatest check on government that we have, our elections.
Yeah, it's almost amazing. It's not almost amazing. It's beyond amazing with what you just outlined, that the press, that the mainstream media does not even find any of this just a little bit curious to even go into it. And that tells you that there's been a climatic shift in the media, in the mainstream media. I mean, we've always known that the mainstream media for the last 30, 40 years has tended to and trended left. But this is an actual blackout of news. When you have people like Neil Cavuto and other news people cutting away from a president when he's speaking live, saying, well, he's not telling the truth, we're cutting away. They're no longer reporting the news, they're censoring it, basically. And that's a very scary thing.
It really is. And we've seen this coming. If you remember, it was just a few months ago, during the lockdown, there was this controversy over hydroxychloroquine. And there were a group of physicians, licensed physicians, wearing white coats, who called a press conference, who wanted to share the fact that they had had very good results with their patients, and that was banished from the entire tech world. It was banished from Twitter and Facebook and presumably YouTube, and it was a watermark. Because these are the people that say, listen to the science, and they were banishing the word of physicians who were at the front lines, who were getting positive results. And so we saw that happen. And then in the lead up to the election, we saw the remarkable censorship of another example of a huge amount of credible evidence that Tony Bobulinski was a dream witness. He had documents. He had a laptop. He had what the president called the laptop from Hades, I'll say. But it was an extraordinary blackout where no one could talk about it.
Yeah.
And we saw it again on all of the big tech and all of the establishment media outlets, ABC, NBC, CBS, Washington Post, New York Times, Boston Globe, the whole bunch of them would not cover it. It managed to get out through innovation, which is what's happening now. But we saw that in the lead up. But I think just a watershed moment, and we talked about this last week, was to see Fox News, who had hired this Democrat operative to run their decision desk. Fox News made that first of all, they were reluctant to call Texas when it was clearly won by the president. And even more importantly, they were reluctant to call Florida, which would have had an effect on the perception of the election. And they called Arizona prematurely, which has still not reached its final number. And even CNN reversed the call after they realized they had followed Fox.
Yeah.
The AP reversed the call. Real Clear Politics doesn't even have Joe Biden as the presumptive president-elect. He doesn't even have 270. So we saw at that moment when Fox called Arizona prematurely, a bunch of people said this is the last straw for Fox, that they have in fact changed. And then it was right after that, it was on a Saturday, that Fox was the first to project prematurely, wrongfully, Biden as the winner, not calling him, as I do, the Senate-elect, which he should be called. No, I'm joking. But they called him the president-elect prematurely. And immediately all the other news organizations, with the exception of Real Clear Politics, jumped on. And from that moment on, Fox became, other than a couple of people in prime time, unwatchable.
Yes.
And I can't tell you how many people anecdotally have said, I've stopped. I don't watch
Yeah, I'm
Fox.
one of them.
And, of course, I've known the founder of Newsmax for a long time. And, of course, he's very happy.
Yes,
but,
I'm sure he is.
But he's putting on programming. Newsmax and One American News have said unequivocally that they're not going to make that call prematurely. And so this is just, it's a moment like we've never seen in America.
It really is.
But it's a moment where, I think last week I used this term, psychological operations. It's from warfare. This is an agenda-driven moment where there is a concerted effort to affect your mind, your mood, your attitude, give you forms and shades of fear in the form of anxiety. And if there's one thing we know, we who look at the world through Christian lenses, Judeo-Christian lenses, we know that it says in the Bible 365 times not to be afraid.
Yes.
And we know what gets rid of fear. Perfect love casts out all fear. And we know the source of that perfect love.
Yeah.
And it's our Savior. So we are to not be afraid, not be confused, not let this lying agenda affect us, because like you brought up, we really have to do the best we can to save this remarkable institution that we have, which is a free and fair election, which is in the process of being destroyed.
Yes. I want to get into the details of this suit, but one of the things that when you're talking about the church and biblically, and when we sent out our announcement today for this program tonight, we had one person respond saying, I hope this is a comedic thing because you're dividing the church. This is somebody who's supposedly a believer. What's amazing to me is how many people are willing to lay down their sword and say, okay, let's just give in to this peaceful transition of power. When in fact, as you have said, and as you have outlined, and that we'll look at even further, there's nothing clear about a Biden victory. And so let's dive into this. The other night, I think it was the other night or Friday night or Saturday morning, I don't remember, but I was either going to bed or getting up, and I turned on the news and I saw on, maybe it was a replay on my computer, but it was Lou Dobbs with Sidney Powell. And I listened to that and my jaw almost dropped, because I knew that I'm listening to somebody, well, two people, Lou Dobbs and Sidney Powell, who are credible people. Sidney Powell, of course, is the attorney who was representing General Flynn. There she is, Sidney Powell. And she's a high-powered attorney, and she, as I understand, does not do anything salaciously or reveal anything that she's not certain about. And then, of course, Rudy Giuliani. So what do you know about these folks and what they've discovered and what they've unearthed so far?
Well, the first thing I want to say is that the media is trying to kookify Sidney Powell and Rudy Giuliani. They're trying to make them look like they're coming up with conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
And Sidney Powell, who I've communicated with, I've not met her in person, but Sidney Powell is a 10-year U.S. attorney. She prosecuted drug lords. She has an impeccable reputation. I heard her say on one of the shows, I think it was on Maria's show, if I tell you something, that means I can prove it.
Yeah.
I don't say things if I can't prove it. And so these are people, in Rudy, I had the privilege, it's been a while, it was a while ago, but I actually had a lunch with Rudy, got to sit across the table, look in his eyes, talk with him. And there's something very special when you meet someone like that.
Yeah.
And Rudy is an amazing human being. He is a genuine guy. And you can see he's like John the Baptist going up against the prevailing winds. This is very, very courageous.
Yes.
That he is doing this because he's being attacked on all sides. He's been investigated. And so both Rudy and Sidney, both Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell, have alluded to evidence that they've found that have to do with the software. Now, we know that there have been, as the press reported, that glitches that have taken place in Georgia, Michigan, other places. The one in Michigan where a county all of a sudden had a 6,000 vote switch because of a glitch.
Yeah.
And that switch resulted in the county going for President Trump rather than Joe Biden. Now, this software, which is actually, I should call it, there's a voting machine that has software embedded in it. The voting machine is made by a company called Dominion.
Yes.
And the software that Dominion uses is Smartmatic. Now, Dominion and Smartmatic work together, and they're kind of like a single company. And what Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell have said is that they now have evidence. They have evidence in the form of witnesses, and they're obtaining evidence in the form of IT evidence. They may well have some hardware or software in their possession. They wouldn't say, but they have evidence that shows that this software is capable. It has a back door in it, as Rudy described it. It is capable of switching votes on a mass scale. And there are witnesses that are able to testify to this kind of thing occurring. And the fact is that in software, IT experts have told me there's a thing called journaling. It's kind of like what Google does to us when we use Google. They keep track of every move we do. Well, on the software, there's a thing that, and it's very, very sophisticated and hard to disable. But the journaling section of the software will show if, in fact, the software has been manipulated. And we should say the Dominion Smartmatic software is in 30 states, reportedly, and in every single swing state. I heard some sources say 28 states, but they all said it was in every single swing state. And if there were similar results that occurred in a single county in Michigan, we're talking about, and Sidney said that we may be talking about millions of votes, which leads back to the statistical anomalies that, in fact, it doesn't make sense, the amount of Biden votes compared to down ballot. It doesn't make sense even from this point of view. The Republicans didn't lose a single House seat, not one. They gained, as of this part of our conversation, 12 House seats, including a couple in Orange County. There's one in Northern California where they stopped the vote. And now they claim it's because of COVID, but they stopped it because the Republicans upsetting an incumbent Democrat. And then all over the country, there are these upsets. It appears very, very likely, we'll talk about that later, but that the Republicans will keep the Senate. They have these two runoff elections in Georgia, although the Democrats are already requesting a record number of absentee ballots in Georgia and urging people to move to Georgia in order to vote, which is illegal, but they're doing it anyway. Thomas Friedman is even, lots of people. But in any case, the fact that the Republicans kept the Senate, kept the House, added seats, and yet Joe Biden gets this record vote, but not anywhere in the country except the 4 cities that have a machine, that are known for corruption, that are the problem in this election. And so it seems to me, so Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell are eminently trustworthy. They are not kooks. They do not say things that are wild. And if you look at during the impeachment, Rudy Giuliani went on the air and he talked about these this new evidence he was getting about Hunter Biden. He didn't tell all the details. Everything he said came true and more.
Yeah.
And Rudy now is saying that there's a mountain of evidence that shows various forms of malfeasance, and he says it's enough votes to change the outcome in the swing states. Sydney says the evidence is coming, and she used the word like a fire hose. So it's coming in so fast, it's hard to process it. And what that means to me is we already know there are certain whistleblowers. There's a whistleblower from the post office. There's a whistleblower who's an IT whistleblower. There's a whistleblower who worked within the government, the local government that was doing counting. These people are standing up courageously, willing to sign affidavits under penalty of perjury, willing to go to court if necessary. And why are there so many? Because Donald Trump had 73 million people who voted for him, and many of them were from urban areas like Atlanta, Milwaukee, Philadelphia, Detroit, the very areas we're talking about. There were Trump supporters appalled by what they saw and who now are signing affidavits. And according to Sidney Powell, they're coming in like a fire hose. That's grounds for optimism. Now the media is telling us, oh, the lawsuits are all losers. They're all being dismissed. They're losing at every level. It's just Trump is all alone and despondent. That's part of the agenda. That's the same agenda that told us about the polls that this election is a landslide for Biden. It won't even be close. Well, guess what? It's so close that it's not over. And a little later in the broadcast, I'll tell you another reason for hope. It's contained in this beautiful document inspired by God called the Constitution.
Yeah. Well, what I heard from Sidney Powell when she spoke is, and correct me if I'm wrong, that there was some conspirators that were involved in this who have come forward, either out of guilt or anticipation of knowing that it was going to be revealed. Have you heard any of that?
Yeah, what I've heard is that there are people inside who understand this software, who may have or may not have worked in or for Dominion or Smartmatic. And we have to realize this is an amazing turnabout, because prominent Democrats were complaining about this software. It was rejected by the state of Texas. It has all kinds of security problems. And people like Elizabeth Warren and Amy Klobuchar said, we can't use this software. You know, it would be better if we went back to the paper ballots. That way we can trace them. Why are we using machines? Remember all the complaints about machines. But suddenly, before this election, combined with the mail-in ballots and in some states, ballot harvesting, these are formulas for fraud.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden the Democrats said, oh, we want the Dominion software. We would like the Dominion software. And then there's a guy by the name of Coomer who is an officer of this company, Dominion. And he's also a shareholder, patent holder. He was ID'd by a Twitter user on he put up pictures of the guy's Facebook page where the guy had quotes from Antifa, all kinds of songs about hating Trump, all this stuff. And all of a sudden that day, this Eric Coomer is his name, his Facebook page disappeared. The Twitter user, who's a guy named Olmstead, his Twitter page was locked up and all the stuff he put up was censored away. And it turns out this Coomer, another whistleblower, managed to hear him, had been penetrating a kind of undercover Antifa. And there was an Antifa, one of these Zoom chat sessions where Eric Coomer, in response to a question about the election, said, you don't have to worry about Trump winning. I've, the expletive, taken care of that. And this is a guy who is a high-ranking PhD officer shareholder of Dominion. And Smartmatic, that supplies the software, their chairman of the board is a guy named, he's a retired admiral, Peter Neffinger. Peter Neffinger is on the transition team for Senate-elect Joe Biden. He's on the transition team. And this company, Rudy says, is founded by Venezuelans. It's very weird. It's a company that actually is a Canadian corporation. It has headquarters in the United States. It's founded by a Venezuelan who's close to Maduro, the dictator of Venezuela, the socialist. These entities, Dominion and Smartmatic, have been cited for fixing elections in South America before. And one of the things Sidney Powell says, she has experts to this effect, the pattern of the way the software works, and there's been other whistleblowers saying this, it works very similar to a patch that can be put on software that's developed by our intelligence. And so there's going to be intelligence experts involved. Rudy Giuliani says, as you said, this is greater than just this election or any candidate. It's a national security issue.
Yeah.
Because he's also said that data from the United States was sent abroad via the internet, I assume, to be counted abroad. This is insane.
Yeah.
And that's stuff that is in his evidence. I'm unaware of the, specifics and details of that. But everywhere you turn, this Smartmatic and Dominion is there is a very highly suspect company. There was good reason why IT people thought it shouldn't be used. And Sidney Powell has alleged explicitly that there are officials in states who bought software from Dominion and their family received kickbacks. She wouldn't name names, but that sure sounds familiar. Family receiving kickbacks.
Yes, it certainly does. With this going into foreign governments or foreign countries wouldn't that make this foreign election influence and widen this whole thing? And according to Sydney, she's saying that some very prominent Democrats are going to be named in this. So I know they can't reveal everything now, but do you have any feel for what she might be referring to there?
No, I don't have a feel for the specific names, but like I said, I mentioned that Sidney Powell had prosecuted drug lords. Mm-hmm. Rudy Giuliani was the third in command in the Justice Department of Ronald Reagan, the mayor of New York. And before he did that, he went after the New York Mafia.
Yes, he did.
This guy is not to be underestimated. He's very similar to the president.
Yes.
You don't count him out. So when they say they have a lot of evidence, they're going to name names, they're going to bring this thing down confidently the way they have. I think they have tremendous credibility. I think there's nothing kooky about them. And of course, the media attaches the conspiracy theory tag to this, mm-hmm. which they did, by the way, for the longest time with the view of Spygate. If you remember when the president first said that he was spied upon in Trump Tower, the entire media said, oh, isn't this ludicrous? And if people supported it and they started to see evidence of it, they were engaged in a conspiracy theory. So I just actually, before I came on the show, I saw a report in the mainstream media that said that a court had rejected the software conspiracy theory of Rudy Giuliani. Well, this is what the press is trying to do to diminish the import of this.
Yeah.
But, Americans are smart, and they know in their gut
Yeah.
that when they went to bed at night after these jurisdictions stopped counting, and all of a sudden in the morning, all these, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of votes. I believe the president was ahead in Pennsylvania, 700,000 votes with 64% counted.
Yeah.
That election, under any normal circumstances, was over, but they stopped.
Yeah.
The thing with the mail-in ballots, the problem with the mail-in ballots is that there are ballots available all over the place that literally anyone can fill out and have, on behalf of either a dead person or a person that doesn't live in the jurisdiction, or a fictitious person for that matter. In Georgia, they're finding already thousands of ballots that are being thrown out in a recount that's not even matching signatures yet. And so there are witnesses that say, using the voting machines, that the Democrats urge, we've got to have these voting machines, that operatives actually put huge amounts of votes through the machines twice, 3 times, 4 times, and counted them, artificially raising the ballot count. They all testify to that under penalty of perjury. There's witnesses. And that's the key to this. The key is the evidence, and we have experienced, credible trial lawyers who have prosecuted the toughest people in the world saying that they have this credible evidence. So we say to ourselves, well, all right, this is going to end up in front of the Supreme Court. Roberts is going to go sideways. Are the others going to hold together? And this is something we have to pray for, of course, because part of the mind games that the media and big tech and this office of the president-elect is, what it's trying to do is not just intimidate us, but intimidate those judges, to basically make them believe that they would be going against the truth and what's best for the country, and on and on. But I'm here to tell you that there is another procedure available to the president that's even stronger than the judicial one. And it's the one that the Constitution dictates. The Constitution says in Article 2, Section 1, that the body that is in charge of presidential elections, that has the final say, it has the final say over the courts. It's the state legislatures.
Yeah.
The state legislatures, in the manner that they choose, pick the electors. Now, if
let me just interrupt. Let me interrupt just because I want to make sure everybody understands. Because everybody's been talking about state legislatures, you're speaking of the representatives, the Congress people from each state,
right?
For instance, the Republican, and there's more states that are represented by Republicans than there are Democrats, even though there are less Republicans in the House, correct?
In the state houses are the ones who make the determination, not the House.
State House, not the House. Okay.
The state houses. So in Pennsylvania, there's a House and a Senate. In Michigan, there's a House and a Senate.
Correct.
In all the states, every single contested state, every single swing state is controlled by the Republicans. They're all controlled by the Republicans. Not all the governors, but the legislature. Okay. So Rudy and Sidney and the other lawyers can make a presentation to the state legislature and say, look, here's this mountain of evidence we found for the good of the country. You choose who the electors are, and the state legislatures can choose Trump electors to represent the real vote after they eliminate the illicit vote. Every one of those swing states has the power to do it. And if it was brought to a court of law, the Constitution is way too explicit. The courts may try to overturn it, they can't. The power is exclusive in the state houses. And so this is, it's something, by the way, when the last case where we had a presidential election contested was Bush v. Gore in the year 2000. And that court not only underscored this fact that the state houses make this decision, meaning the House and the Senate of a state, but they also said they can take it back anytime in this process.
Yeah. James, there's a lot to cover. Let's see if we could go to the audience, because I wanted to get to some of their questions. Marisa, can you bring up some questions here, and we'll try to answer these as briefly, because we are getting into the hour pretty good tonight. So, okay, this is from Christy Brown. Can you speak to President Trump's refusal to concede? Is it possible for him to stay in office with this strategy?
Sure. Look, he's very smart not to concede. In the Bush v. Gore contest, Al Gore didn't concede, and that contest went on for 37 days. We have actually, the Constitution specifies the first Monday after the third Wednesday. I think it's, anyway, the electors have to meet on December 14th. So the president had this critical time to assemble the evidence, to move up the judicial ladder through the trial courts into the appellate courts, eventually reaching the Supreme Court, and also to formulate this communication with the state legislatures. Trump's team has already asked the state legislatures not to certify in those states that are contested. They don't want the electors to go. They're GOP. They're not going to do it. And interestingly, if December 14th comes and for some reason a president's not elected, the contest goes, according to the Constitution, to the House of Representatives, the U.S. House of Representatives, but it's not voted on by the individual House members as individuals. It's voted as states, one vote per state. And guess who controls the most states, delegations? The GOP. Trump wins.
Don't we want to not have to go that way? I mean, if this evidence that comes out is conclusive and compelling, is it possible to do, there's not a re-election. You couldn't do another election, could you? Because I think once the House, once the legislature.
There's precedent for that. Courts have ordered a new election at the local level. They're going to be very reluctant to do it, but courts can order an audit. Courts can order an extension of the deadlines. The Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court can order certain districts to vote over if they wanted to. They have a number of remedies at their command to try to deal with this. But I think personally, there are some districts that the only remedy is going to be a do-over, that they'll have to vote again because it's so corrupted. There's been evidence that's been destroyed, and it's just a totally corrupted thing. And we also have some districts where there's been a turnout of like 120% or something like that.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to be. This is a very challenging thing for the courts, but it's critically important. We have to have this evidence air. We have to, and in the future, somehow, we've got to eradicate these evil twins. Mail-in balloting, we have to eradicate, and ballot harvesting. Those two things guarantee fraud. Yeah. And the Democrats have been, actually, Nancy Pelosi put those two things in her version of the COVID stimulus bill to let you know what the Democrat Party wants.
Yeah, exactly. Here's one from Keith Brockman. Didn't Sidney Powell say she was working for free? Do you know anything about that?
I'm not sure I can answer that. Let's put it this way. I am. I have a former student, Deborah Dewart, who is working with me and has for years with a foundation. And we've been approached, and we're going to chip in on the paperwork. There's tons of volunteer attorneys. I think Sydney would work for free. I know Rudy's the president's lawyer. I think Rudy's being paid. Interestingly enough, you just made me think of this. Rudy is a cybersecurity expert. He owns a cybersecurity firm.
Yeah.
He has all kinds of contacts in the IT world. When he says these things about the software, it's not like someone who hasn't done these kinds of investigations before. Yeah. So, but anyway, whether Sydney's working for free or not, I think she's a noble person, and I think she's working for America.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. What do you think is going to be the pushback from the Democrats? And well, let me go back to this question, because we talked a little bit about making sure the justices stand firm, because there's going to be a lot of pressure. What are you hearing from the Republican side of the Senate and the House of Republicans backing this, or some of them getting, as Margaret Thatcher said to George Bush, "Don't go wobbly on me"? Are they wavering, or are some of them just saying, "Hey, let's just move on and get this done"? Because he really needs support from both houses.
He does. He has it from the usual people. He has it from Ted Cruz and Lindsey Graham. He has it from Jim Jordan. I'm hoping that John Radcliffe is working behind the scenes, being the director of national intelligence. He has all kinds of access to things. Unfortunately, we have seen some wobbly Republicans, Mike DeWine, the governor of Ohio. We've, of course, Mitt Romney, of course, some of these moderates who come out and start using the language of the media and calling Joe Biden the president-elect and saying we've got to move on, don't pay any attention. The problem is that Americans know. They know something very wrong has occurred. They know that it was extremely unconventional and unprecedented. And I just don't think these Republicans are going to have a groundswell. I think the vast majority of the Republicans are going to back the president. And if it comes down to a situation where, for example, went to the House of Representatives to decide, I think the Republican delegations will be solid. And I think they'll choose the president. Now, as far as the Democrats, if, and my prayer is when President Trump is declared the winner, when he has the proper votes, we all know what the Democrats have been doing all summer. So I suspect there will be lots of looting and rioting and burning and demonstrations and consternation, and people on MSNBC and CNN screaming that it's a constitutional crisis and claiming that the conspiracists have somehow won. If the Supreme Court makes this courageous decision, they will all be doxxed and attacked and called every name in the book in the social media. I mean, that's part of the territory. But this is one of those times, I think we all know instinctively what's right and what's wrong, what's truth and what are lies. And we have to go with the truth with a capital T. That's an attribute of him who we worship.
Absolutely. Amen to that. Here's one from Mike Strand. Actually, I'll full
disclosure.
Disclosure is my cousin. Has he heard about a raid of a CIA outlet to recover the servers of Dominion? Sidney Powell said something about this on Newsmax tonight.
Yeah, Congressman Louis Gohmert was on a show, and he referred to a post on Twitter, a tweet that he saw that indicated that there was some sort of raid. He described the U.S. Army raiding a facility that was in Germany that had servers that was somehow involved in the count. I then saw something on another site claiming that no, that didn't happen. It was some other military unit. It wasn't the Army. But I did hear Sidney Powell allude to it. Actually, she retweeted the Louis Gohmert statement. So I actually think that's one where the dust hasn't settled. There is a certain amount of fog of war, so to speak, of just like, because this is a war. And there's a certain amount of things that bubble up and then they turn out maybe not to be true. And so that one we have to wait on. I don't know if it's true or not, but I know for sure that both Sidney Powell and Rudy Giuliani have much more evidence than they're showing. They're keeping their cards close to the vest. And we know that, like I said, Kayleigh McEnany had 240 affidavits. And we also know from looking at the armchair statisticians that in 1938, there was a guy named Frank Benford who came up with a discovery in the way numbers distributed in data sets. It's called Benford's Law. It's used to find fraud in accounting and banking, but it's being used by the president, and it's yielding tremendous fruit. So there's all kinds of very important kinds of evidence. I think what they're going to have to do is hone it down to the best presentation to the Supreme Court. And we have the number of judges now. So it's just a matter of none of them going wobbly and following the law.
Well, so in our waning moments, so does this go directly to the Supreme Court? It doesn't go to lower courts and then work its way up like typically a case would, or does it go directly? How's this going to play out in terms of presenting this whole thing?
For example, in Pennsylvania, there was a situation where the governor went to the legislature and said, I want to change the rules. He wanted to change the rules so that he could count late. Yeah. The legislature said, no. So he went to the courts, got an illicit order. That is part of the appeal in Pennsylvania, very strong. And that went on an emergency writ to the U.S. Supreme Court. And Justice Alito issued an emergency order until the case is heard, directing Pennsylvania to segregate the counting to those received after 8 p.m. on election night. That's actually a good sign. So sometimes they will go in an emergency fast track to the Supreme Court, but the big case that they're putting together, they have to plod through, just as it did during Bush v. Gore, and as it gets closer, as we're getting close to the deadline, they may take the whole thing on an emergency to the Supreme Court. But it has to go through the federal system and generally go through the state first, and you have a lot of hackery in state judiciary. So there are judges just dismissing these cases out of hand, but these, of course, are Democrat judges and activist judges. And so we're going to have to go through a lot of that. And even in the federal level, there's a federal district level, federal appellate level, and then to the Supreme Court. And so we have to go through all that. That's why it's going to take time. It is going to take weeks.
Well, what happens if it doesn't get resolved or worked out by that time? Does the transition of power begin, or what?
Well, if it doesn't get worked out by December 14th and the electors are unable to vote, then it goes to the House of Representatives.
So there's where.
Now, if, we've never had this happen, technically our deadline is January 20th to get it all resolved, because that's when the inauguration of the new president occurs. And if there's no president to inaugurate, nobody certifies, Then we go into a true constitutional crisis where it's possible that Nancy Pelosi would end up being the acting president, God forbid.
Yeah, God forbid.
After going through other succession opportunities. But I don't believe we're looking at that scenario, because I believe that would motivate the state houses, if the electors didn't vote on December 14th, that the state delegations would go in and choose Trump for his second term, let the chips fall where they may, do the right thing in accordance with the Constitution. That's what it says to do.
What, James, would you say, because I'm pretty sure there's a number of my friends on the left watching tonight. What would you say to them? Because I do kind of do battle on Facebook sometimes with them about what's going down and why they shouldn't dismiss this out of hand. I mean, I know that they're listening to the mainstream media talking points, and as you saw tonight, they're all in lockstep. But what would you say to them that why you shouldn't just dismiss this out of hand?
Well, I think it's important to look at the legacy of the Democrat Party and liberals. You know, we have people like Harry Truman, John F. Kennedy, Hubert Humphrey, and excuse me. It seems to me that it benefits all Americans. It's like you said, this isn't about Trump. For liberals, it doesn't have to be about Trump at all. It's about whether we're going to have fair and impartial elections, whether we're going to have a vote that matters at all. I mean, if you allow the kind of mail-in balloting, ballot harvesting is when somebody gets paid to collect the vote of another. Mm-hmm. An operative gets paid to go to nursing homes and gather votes. If we allow that kind of thing, if we allow it, just turn our heads away when we have affidavits talking about dead people voting, talking about machines running through ballots over and over again, we have that sort of thing, we no longer have a representative government. One of the fundamental institutions of our country is compromised. We can't have that.
Yeah. It's absolutely crazy. I've never seen anything like this. I know you probably haven't in your lifetime. It's a constitutional crisis. Boy, we just pray that it gets worked out and truth comes out.
Well, there's one thing we've seen during the Trump era. It's been an era of revelation. We found out a lot about our nation that we didn't really know. Mm. We didn't know the level of corruption. We didn't know the kind of scandals that exists out there. So I think that revelation is important, but we also need justice. So we're praying for that.
Yes, indeed. And, you know, for those of us who are awaiting the Savior's return, you know, we know that certain things have to take place and certain things are kind of happening. You and I talked a little bit about this last week, about the increase in the birth pangs of what's happening in the world. You know, it's no coincidence that, you know, we're all masked up and we're closing down again, and all these things are just coming together. But God's got a plan, and His plan is good. And we fight and scream and we pray that His plan is worked out, and of course it will. But whatever happens, we know that God is in charge, and that we have a Savior who loves us. And if you're watching tonight and you don't know that Savior, please let us know, and because we'd like to pray with you. And it's very simple to pray for salvation. But that's just the start. That's just the beginning, to pray to receive Christ and to confess your sins before Him. and ask him into your heart. It's not a magic wand that you wave, but it's just a prayer of contrition, a prayer of confession. And then the Holy Spirit comes in and begins to move in your life. And but that's just the beginning. And so if you're out there tonight and you want to pray that prayer, let us know. Email us at prayer@the-upper-room-presents. That's prayer@the-upper-room-presents. We're here to talk about politics, but it's all part of the public square. And some Christians get a little bit bent out of shape when we talk politics because they don't think faith and politics mix, but it's all part of the life that we're living. And what we're seeing goes beyond just politics, if you will. It's major. And so, James, once again, thank you so much for being willing to be on tonight. You're a true patriot, and you're a good man of God, and we just really enjoy your perspective. And I think a lot of people, a lot of the folks that are watching tonight have come away with a better perspective of what to expect. And I think we're going to see some things unfolding in the days ahead.
Absolutely. And how wonderful that at the same time we're getting up to speed on our stewardship of our nation, you invite people to the beautiful free gift of grace that's waiting for them.
Yes.
That is, and that's what our life ultimately is all about.
Yes, indeed. Well, blessings, brother, and we'll talk to you soon.
You, Ron.
Thanks, buddy. And folks, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week on live stream at the Upper Room. God bless you.